Well, I resonate with a great deal of what Father Bernard has said, and particularly the bit where you talk about Geoffrey not communicating. Geoffrey was not didn't believe in creative disobedience. You stick to the rules. But where to start talking about Geoffrey Wainwright? And I want now to talk about him as a person, as a friend, as a very ordinary human being. Yes, he was a saint, as Professor Rush has said, a particular kind of saint, an extraordinary saint, you might say. But he was also a very ordinary person, someone with whom you could relate on the human level. And I think the first thing Geoffrey would want someone to say is that he was a proud son of Yorkshire. This was at the basis of all Geoffrey was as a person, that he came from that northern part of Great Britain that is called Yorkshire. And he would say that, I'm a Yorkshireman, you know. He was also the son of someone who was a railway person, and he never, ever lost his love of trains. I was given to understand by Geoffrey that I knew he was an only child. He was somewhat solitary and shy. He had no siblings and he had no first cousins. So during his life, he managed to make a huge and wide circle of friends from all around the world. And it was the privilege of some of us to be included in that circle of friends. I met him first in 1986, when the World Methodist Council and Conference met in Nairobi. And I met him at the pre-conference meeting of the Ecumenical Standing Committee. Those were the days, my friends, when it was possible to have 2-day satellite conferences of the World Methodist Council committees before the razzmatazz of the main conference. Razzmatazz, let me tell you, was Geoffrey's word and not mine. I don't want it to be attributed to me, please. And needless to say, I was totally in awe of this man whose works I had had to study at the Irish School of Ecumenics, and furthermore, on whose works I was expected to be examined. Geoffrey, as someone has already said this afternoon, had been a lecturer at the Irish School of Ecumenics, so it very quickly became a subject of conversation because he really enjoyed his time at ISE. And it was after Nairobi that I was myself appointed to the Methodist Roman Catholic International Commission, on which I served for 4 quinquennia, that amazing American word that really means 5-year terms. And it was during that time that we became friends as well as colleagues and collaborators. And it was a particular joy at that time to meet Margaret. And I think it was you, Father Jim, who referred to Margaret as his lovely wife, and that is absolutely the right adjective. And I use the word advisedly here. She was also long-suffering in that she did take in people with no warning to come and, share bed and breakfast in their house. And she smiled and graciously always at all of us, I think. Geoffrey once described Margaret to me as the kindest person I know. And I think that's absolutely true. And as you probably know, most of you, they have 2 daughters, Joanna and Katie, and a son, Dominic, along with 3 grandchildren, Wesley, Mateos, and Sophia. And there were a collection, as I remember, of cats and dogs somewhere along the line. But I knew Geoffrey really first and mostly in the context of the Methodist Catholic International Commission. And as many of you will be aware, the Commission meets in different countries where Methodists and Catholics coexist. One of these places was in Vienna, where I first met you, Father, and then places like Venice, Lisbon, Savannah, Jerusalem, Krakow, to name just a few people. Geoffrey and I shared this belief in what might be called the stewardship of opportunity, by which I mean if you have the opportunity to travel to a beautiful place, then take an extra day to see what that place has to offer. And we usually did, to visit, as someone has already said, museums and art galleries and other sort of historic sites, and we maximized on that. Geoffrey was fascinated by art, and one of you has already alluded to that, particularly painting. But Geoffrey knew what he liked, or he thought he knew what he liked, and he had to be really persuaded strongly to explore further. He gave a whole new meaning to the word dogmatic when it came to terms of art appreciation. I do see some of you laughing about this. Let me give an example. The paintings of the Bruegel family, those Flemish and Dutch painters of the 16th and 17th century, had to be worked on. He was quite convinced he didn't like them. They were a challenge, but I won on that one. And I was even thanked for my efforts by being presented with a novel about the Bruegel family. I got it out of the cupboard the other day just to have a look at it to remind me of those arguments we used to have. The same thing obtained with the wonderful tapestries that you find in the Wachwell Castle in Krakow in Poland. I don't think I like tapestries, he said to me. And I thought of the Raphaels just across the Tiber from us here. And I said, well, try. And he did. And he did. And I was thanked for my efforts there as well. Geoffrey had his foibles and quirks like the rest of us. I mean, hands up, who doesn't have any? And those of you who are familiar with Geoffrey will have known about his collection of hats and caps. He didn't go anywhere without a hat or a cap, because being, shall we say, follically challenged, he liked to wear a head covering both in hot weather and in cold weather. So wherever we were, there was one. And when one of these items of clothing got lost, it constituted a major crisis. Yes, I can see some of you agreeing with that too. And this happened when we were meeting in 1999 in Jerusalem. One of them got lost. So having rather more hair than he, I lent him my linen cap. Sadly, though predictably, this got lost too. And in a state of some remorse, he gave me these elat stones that I'm wearing this evening. He felt amends should be made for the loss of my cap. On another occasion, when he was staying with Tom, my husband, and me and Margaret down in West Cork, another of these caps disappeared, only to be found some days later underneath the sitting room table, where it had obviously got kicked. It was duly posted back to North Carolina. And one cap worn was a source of some wonderment at the local post office when I completed the customs declaration. Geoffrey was into sport, and in particular, he was into cricket. Now, cricket is a sport which completely baffles me. I have no idea what they're on about. You hear the kind of language of cricket, maidens and runs and silly mid-ons. I hadn't a clue what cricket was about, but he was absolutely determined that his son Wesley, born, bred, and living in the United States, should understand this game. I don't know where Wesley is at on that now. And birthday cards, one was given to understand, should always have a cricket scene on them. Well, cricket isn't actually a game we play a huge amount in Ireland, so it was really quite a task. He was also an enthusiastic and I believe very efficient and challenging tennis player. He was, as someone has already mentioned, a linguist of considerable talent. He spoke English, well, obviously, German, French, and Italian, and he could move from one to the other with an amazing facility. It's a gift that really I admire enormously, speaking just a tiny bit of Irish, like one or two of us here, and nothing very much else. But Geoffrey was very proficient at languages, and communication, whether through different languages, but communication was his big thing. He was also big into photography. Someone talked earlier about his strong sense of aesthetics. Frequently, very frequently, those of us who accompanied Geoffrey around an ancient and picturesque city would be prevailed upon to stand beside him and watch out for the traffic. Now, this had nothing whatsoever, you will understand, to do with road safety, and everything to do with the composition of a picture he wished to take. Lorries and buses, sisters and brothers, have a particularly nasty way of interfering with the composition of a photograph. And whereas this is quite okay with digital cameras, such as you have, Stephanie, it was not okay with film. And so you'd get a mutter, let me know when the coast is clear. Is that red bus moving? Watch out for the lorries coming around that corner, as he composed a photograph with all sorts of lenses and twiddly things. But it has to be said that the end product was always worth it, because Geoffrey was a wonderful photographer. And his photographs, particularly of carvings and things on churches, were absolutely wonderful. And then there was the matter, again, to do with photography, of what Margaret once referred to, in my hearing, as the human interest element of a photograph. Sit there. No, not there, there. Sit there. Stand beside that poster and point to the words. Look interested. And one did one's best. Then there was the position, the valuable position of photographer's assistant. Hold that branch back, would you? Could you move that bin a little to the left? And so on, instructions to the photographer. Would you take off your coat? Well, I take this, and this might be a freezing cold day, but you look better without a coat in the photograph. So photography was a big thing for Geoffrey, and I do see that this resonates with things. I absolutely take on board the bit about the singing. Geoffrey knew Charles Wesley hymns that none of the rest of us have ever heard of, and he had hymns for most occasions, even not quite for every problem. And he would sing vigorously, and I regret to say tunelessly, to these hymns, but his knowledge of Wesley hymns was phenomenal. He loved my country, the country of some of us here, and he used to describe himself, and indeed signed himself on a book that I have, as a friend of St. Patrick's people. So Father Martin and Bishop Brian, there we go. He used to say, Dublin is one of my favourite cities. Yes, well, those of us who don't live in Dublin didn't wish to contradict him. And he was fascinated by the Glenstall Ecumenical Conference, which was a large part of my life and also of your life, Father Martin, when he came to speak at Glenstall on several occasions. He was, yes, a theologian, an Ecumenist, and a liturgist, but a very human and loving person, a friend. And if you're watching, Margaret and Joanna and Katie and Dominic, thank you for lending us Geoffrey, amazing companion, perceptive art critic, indefatigable walker, brilliant photographer, lover of Charles Wesley's hymns, and from my perspective, friend of St. Patrick's people. Yesh de gareva anam delish. May his holy soul be at the right hand of God. Thank you.